Welcome back. Now we'll learn about hazardous waste. At the end of this video, you should be able to know what are the 4 defining characteristics of hazardous waste, understand what cradle to grave means, learn how to identify if a product is hazardous, as well as know some of the ways for proper hazardous waste disposal. It's important to know who is regulated for hazardous waste. Under RCRA, generators, transporters, as well as treatment, storage, and disposal facilities are just a few of the types of facilities or operators that are regulated. It is important to know households and residents are not regulated for hazardous waste, and we'll cover that later in this video. So, for those regulated, they fall under what is known as cradle to grave. Cradle, the point of generation, is the hazardous waste generation at any facility. In this cartoon, we can see a paint shop, some lawn care, and even a dry cleaner. Those are all hazardous waste generators. The amount of hazardous waste generated in a month determines what's known as your generator status. All hazardous waste generators must see through their waste from transport to end disposal. Transportation occurs by licensed and permitted transporters. They take them to their end destination of disposal, treatment, or recycling, known as the grave. So, if your facility is a hazardous waste generator, you must maintain records of the entire process, generation or cradle, until end disposal or grave. So what is hazardous waste? There are 4 questions that we use to determine if a waste is hazardous. First, is it a solid waste? Is it excluded from regulations? Is the waste listed hazardous waste? And lastly, does it exhibit a hazardous waste characteristic? Each facility that generates hazardous waste must make a waste determination. This includes identifying wastes that are within the 4 characteristics. If it is listed under the F, K, P, or U, if it is mixed with any hazardous waste, or if it is derived from any hazardous waste. This picture here was during an emergency response situation where a container of hazardous waste caught fire and the truck had to be pulled over for emergency personnel to extinguish this fire, and the spillage resulted in contaminated soil that now also must be cleaned up as hazardous waste. The 4 characteristics of hazardous waste include toxicity, reactivity, corrosivity, and ignitability. A waste can exhibit more than one of these characteristics, and it can be one of these characteristics and even a listed waste. First is toxicity. A hazardous waste is defined as toxic if the concentration from leachate from the toxicity characteristic leaching procedure is tested. Most of the time, a waste is toxic when it contains one or more of the regulated 8 metals or 32 organic compounds. In this picture, you can see that there is a spill of hexavalent chromium, which is a known carcinogen, and it targets the respiratory system, kidneys, liver, skin, and even eyes. The next characteristic is ignitability. It is any material with the following characteristics. It can be a liquid with a flash point of less than 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Some examples include some solvents, mineral spirits, as well as paint. Solids that can readily ignite and burn vigorously from friction, absorption of moisture, or even spontaneous combustion. An example of that would be sodium and phosphorus metals. A gas can also be ignitable when it is compressed. You can find specific regulations for that under 49 CFR 173. And lastly, a DOT oxidizer, which can include peroxides, nitrates, chlorate, and others. In this picture, this facility had a spill of ignitable fluid that they had not cleaned up. What do you think is wrong with that? The third hazardous waste characteristic includes corrosivity. A material displaying the following characteristics can be defined as corrosive. An aqueous waste with a pH less than 2 or greater than 12.5. It contains at least 20% water. A common example is some types of rust removers and battery acid. The liquid that can corrode steel at a rate of more than 0.25 inches per year. A common way that facilities determine the corrosivity is using the paint filter test. Another example is copper or ferric chloride, which is used for metal etching. In this picture, we were called out for an illegal dumping investigation where we can see that whatever liquid hazardous waste is in this container has corroded the sides of the container and is now leaking into the environment. For reactivity, materials that react with air, water, or other substances that result in some type of fire, explosion, or even toxic gas. It can also have any of the following characteristics. It can normally be unstable and readily undergo violent change. It reacts violently with water, forms potentially explosive mixtures, or when mixed with water, it generates a toxic gas, vapor, or fume. One example of a very reactive hazardous waste is cyanide or sulfide-bearing waste. This picture is of an empty canister of diethyl ether that's in a plastic bucket that has peroxides in it. There's even a frozen cantaloupe. Hazardous waste facilities must maintain different areas to keep their hazardous waste to ensure that the employees as well as the environment are safe. The first area is known as a satellite accumulation area. This is where the hazardous waste is generated. And then these containers are stored here until they are full. Once a container is full, facilities can move them to the central accumulation area. This is where containers are stored before transport. Remember at the beginning when I said the amount generated determines your status? For a small quantity generator, they have up to 180 days to ship out wastes that are stored in this central accumulation area. For a large quantity generator, they have 90 days. Part of the accumulation areas that are also required for facilities is the use of emergency equipment. This includes an internal communication or alarm system in case there is a reaction and they need to evacuate or clean up a spill. This can be as simple as an air horn or a two-way radio. Most of the time now, everyone has a cell phone, and that works as well. Fire extinguishers and spill kits must also be in this location to ensure safety. That was just the top of what hazardous waste is. If you want to know more, feel free to email me. I want to just show you some common violations of facilities when they weren't storing their waste properly. Like in this picture, what would you do if one of these canisters in the very middle started leaking a potentially corrosive waste? How would you get to it? What do you think is wrong with this picture? First, you can see that the lid is not actually on the container. Part of being a hazardous waste generator is making sure your containers are closed at all times, except when actively adding waste to them. Next, we can see that this container obviously is not compatible with whatever waste is being stored in it, and it is burning a hole into the container. Another thing wrong with it is there's no type of label saying that it is a hazardous waste, what those potential hazards are, or when waste was first put in the container, also known as your accumulation start date. For this picture, they have proper aisle spacing so we can get to any drum in case we need it. But similarly, there's no label on these drums, and so we don't know what is in each one of them. We don't know if it is a hazardous waste or not. What about this picture? Do you think this is a proper way to store your hazardous wastes? This was actually from an inspection that we did when I was working in Arizona. Obviously, we don't know what is in these buckets because there's no labels. We don't know how long these wastes have been sitting here. And if something were to occur somewhere in the back of this pile, the facility would have no clue that it was going on. To switch topics a little, remember when I said that households are not regulated? Well, that's true. They are not regulated under RCRA, but households can generate what's known as household hazardous waste. The average household has 60 hazardous product containers at their house at any given time. Common items are paint, some cleaners, some oils and batteries, as well as pesticides. What do you think your house has? What about your parents' house? For me, I know my parents have a lot of paint because they're in the middle of doing a remodel. But you have to make sure that all of these hazardous things aren't mixed with each other to create a hazard. Is this product hazardous? How do you know? One looks like a water bottle. I don't know what the other one is. Ah, look, there we can see. Well, this liquid has the same color as apple juice as well as some soap. So do you know if it's actually for consumption or really just a cleaner? Labeling is very important for all waste. Some signal labels that you can find on common household hazardous materials include danger and poison, or a caution or warning label, or there's no signal words at all. Here in this first picture on the left, we can see an old version of Drano. You can see that it has those big words danger on them with the hazard indicated that it is a poison. The other picture is the bottom of a bathroom cleaner. You can see that they write out the chemicals and the concentrations. There's also a warning label on this bottle. So why do you need proper disposal? What about facilities? Why do they need proper disposal? Well, hazardous materials are harmful to sanitation workers. They can emit harmful vapors. They are definitely harmful to the environment and wildlife, and generally they can't be removed in the water treatment process. Some disposal methods for household hazardous waste include sharing it with a neighbor. If you have a bag of fertilizer that you don't need anymore, maybe share it with your neighbor. The city also puts on household hazardous waste events, which can do a mass collection of household hazardous wastes. You can also visit the local recycling center. This picture is from the recycling center here in Fort Collins, where they have separated waste streams and sometimes even will accept your household hazardous waste depending on the month. You should really only throw away a household hazardous waste in the landfill if it is the container only. Here's some pictures now from my time in Arizona. Remember that situation that I told you a drum caught on fire? This is part of that emergency response. First, they had to come and extinguish the fire. After the drum contaminated the soil, the picture on the right shows that the soil had to be cleaned up as well. This picture on the right is actually of a drum that someone threw into the desert and tried to bury. That was a fun inspection. This is of an illegal dump site of CRT glass. When growing up, did you ever have a box TV? That was CRT glass. And this picture is of different light bulbs that a facility did not store properly prior to having them disposed. When each one of those breaks, a little bit of mercury vapor is emitted, which can be very harmful to the employees in the area. On Thursday, we'll talk more about some wastes. Thanks.